We're at the Friends of St Helena annual general meeting in Oxford, a long, long way from the island and from the Island Museum in Jamestown. But, of course, it was people here who helped to bring it about, including Tessa Smith.
The real person behind it was Dr. Terry Spence.
Who's recently passed on.
Yes, she was the leading light, and she put huge amounts of energy, hours, time, everything, getting everybody motivated. So she was brilliant at motivating.
She got me motivated, got me on board.
Edward Baldwin, what was your role?
The museum was put together by a designer, a facilitator on the island, and somebody who kind of liaised between the two, and I had that role. I provided a lot of design input, found some sources of funding and donations of exhibits and all sorts of things, organised logistics and transport and ordered showcases and you name it. I was involved with it.
Well, I know there were some stories relating to some of the logistical problems. It must have been a massive burden.
I was driven forward by the interest and the desire to do it, and it never felt a burden. The real burden was that in those days we were relying very heavily on a very slow internet. And I'd get home of an evening, set my dial-up internet to download the designs and whatever were being sent from the island. 2 hours later, I could then start editing the files and then leave them to upload overnight. And I did that night after night after night in the main design period.
What was your expertise?
I come from a background in the world of numismatics.
That's money, isn't it?
That's coins,
yeah.
Coin collecting. But it was a commercial interest, but we've always had close connections with museums all over the world. And so I had a bit of a background in how a museum should operate and also knew quite a lot about the subject matter for St Helena.
We say there were lots of logistical challenges. We can't go into all of them, but the one I remember was hearing about the problems with the glass cases. They got the displays, but not enough glass to go around them.
What happened was the showcases were built on the island by a local carpenter, but we ordered steel fronts for them with laminated glass, which were shipped out from the UK. And somewhere in transit, a couple of the crates broke loose in the hold of the ship in bad weather, and a lot of the glass arrived cracked, and much of it was totally unusable. We had enough fittings but not enough glass, and a complete set of fresh sheet glass had to be obtained from the UK and shipped out, and needless to say it didn't arrive in time for the opening, and we're still working on changing glass because it is incredibly difficult to get the old glass out of these steel frames.
10 years on, you're still doing it?
10 years on, there are still showcases with cracked glass.
What were the other highlights for you? What are the other things you particularly remember?
Sourcing some of the more interesting items. And Terry Spence, who we talked about, she commissioned a model of a Portuguese carrack to put in the museum. I had to collect this from its maker in Bournemouth and crate it and take it down to Cardiff to put it on the RMS and design a showcase for it and so on. There were lots of challenges like that which were all very exciting at the time.
I remember there's a governor's uniform in there, donated by Alan Hall, wasn't it?
Yes, Alan Hall, yeah.
Yes. And they don't have ostrich feather hats anymore.
The uniform was actually formally abolished by statute by Governor Clancy, and so the current governor has no right to wear the uniform.
Not like President Bush on the deck of an aircraft carrier then. Now, Tessa, you were there. You were there for the opening.
We were there for 3 months in 2002, yes, for the opening, and many people on the island just volunteered their labour, and we just used to go down to the museum every day and say, who wants what done? You know. So I learned a lot about painting, bookcases, cupboards, all sorts of things.
You were painting up to the wire?
Up to the wire, yes. At the bottom of the staircase there's a large picture, and behind it the backing we had to do, I can't remember, and I was painting that I think at 10:30 the night before the opening and hoping it dried overnight. Yeah.
And what was the mood at the opening?
I think everybody was excited. Everybody was overwhelmed. We had, I can't remember how many people came in and signed the visitors' book. You'll remember, probably.
I wasn't actually there.
No, you weren't there, but you might remember.
I had to leave
There
the
was
island before.
Yeah.
You weren't there?
No, I had a day job to get back to in London, and I left the island about 2 weeks before the museum opened, sadly.
You have seen it since?
I go to the island every year, and I even have a house there now, so... Good. And I work in the museum whenever I'm on the island.
So a lot of excitement. And it was St Helena Day? Or?
Yes, was it? Well, if it was the 21st, yes, it was. Yes, yeah. And the governor, the speeches some of them went on and on and on. And I think what we have heard since is that many people who know museums all over the world say this is as good as many museums all over the world, because the previous museum was tucked away in a Broadway house, and my husband, in fact, said, this is a museum of museums and ought to be just moved into the new museum to show what the old museum was like.
Pat Reynolds, you're an expert on museums, or you're in the business. What do you think of that idea, a museum of museums?
I think it's a great idea. I visited St Helena as a tourist, so I went to the museum and I was really, really impressed. I can just agree with what it's built with the design values and with the quality of interpretation that one would expect in Britain from a new build county museum. And it's in a place that everybody who listens to this will understand, but as an outsider I didn't really understand until I actually got to the island, is like talking about an English parish. So there are museums that serve English parishes and they are so much less ambitious, and they don't tend to take so much care in thinking about who it is going to be seeing their objects and documents. I think the museum in St Helena has achieved the really difficult balance that you get with museums of place, that there is a tension potentially between the people who know the place intimately, live there, have grown up there, or have come in and worked there for a number of years, who know its story intimately, and the people who, like me, are drifting by for a week or a few days, for whom this is just a small part of a larger experience, but a very temporary one. And it therefore has to do the two things of telling the story of St Helena to people like me that drift in, and also telling the story of St Helena to St Helenians. And I think it achieves that magnificently.
And one way it achieves the latter is through quite an ambitious education programme.
It does, yes. The care for users of all ages is quite evident in what's laid out in the museum and the way it works. I was very impressed by what I saw of how the museum works with the communities, the way the temporary exhibition area is used, for example. When I was there, was used to explore a debate about whether the St Helena should re-choose its national flower. And obviously the volunteers and the experience of volunteering is very clearly really important to people.
And I just mentioned the first curator was Sarah.
Sarah Holland.
Sarah Holland. She was a Canadian. She was brilliant. She worked her guts out to set it up, and she was very keen on education of children.
Pat, you didn't say what your job is.
Oh, my day job is I'm the strategic lead for heritage services for Surrey County Council, and I have a background as a museum development officer.
If you could suggest one improvement for the St Helena Museum, what would it be?
I would look at its shop. I think it could do more to possibly work with local producers to create more for the tourists to buy and take away.
OK, what do you think about having heard the professional opinion of what you created and helped create 10 years ago? What do you think? Make you proud?
A great accolade to the entire team.
Yeah, the same. Everybody worked so hard, and I'm sure they still are. I know they still are from
And
what
it's
we hear.
possibly the greatest achievement of the Friends of St Helena?
Most definitely, yes.
One of the great things about it is that it's saints and friends together.